Hi, and thanks for listening to this sample of the FreeSchool Simplified Classic version of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. FreeSchool Simplified Classics are the next best thing to the original book and are intended to make classic literature more accessible. If you like this story, click on the link below in the description box to check out the book. Let's begin. Chapter 1. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had wandered in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning. Since dinner, however, the cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so dark and a rain so driving that further outdoor exercise was out of the question. I was glad of it. I never liked long walks, especially on chilly afternoons. It was dreadful to come home in the raw twilight, with chilled fingers and toes. My heart was always saddened by the scolding of Bessie, the nurse, and humbled by the awareness of my physical inferiority to Eliza, John, and Georgiana Reed. Eliza, John, and Georgiana were now clustered round their mamma in the drawing-room. She lay reclined on a sofa by the fireside. With her darlings about her, for once neither arguing nor crying, she looked perfectly happy. Me, she had forbidden from joining the group. "I regret that I must keep you at a distance," she said, "but until I have heard from Bessie that you are trying to be more friendly and cheerful, I really must exclude you from privileges intended only for happy little children." "What does Bessie say I have done?" I asked. "Jane, I don't like questions. Besides, there is something truly off-putting in a child talking back to her elders in that way. Be seated somewhere, and until you can speak pleasantly, remain silent." I slipped into a breakfast room that lay next to the drawing room. It contained a bookcase. I soon acquired a book full of pictures and climbed into the window seat. Gathering up my feet, I sat cross-legged, and having drawn the red wool curtain nearly closed, I was doubly hidden. Folds of scarlet drapery shut in my view to the right hand. To the left were the clear panes of glass, protecting but not separating me from the dreary November day. At intervals, while turning over the pages of my book, I studied the sight of that winter afternoon. Far away I saw pale mist and cloud. Nearby I saw wet lawn and storm-beat shrubs. Unending rain swept away wildly in a long and miserable blast. I returned to my book, Bewick's History of British Birds. I cared little for the words printed inside, and yet there were certain pages that, child as I was, I could not quite pass without reading. They were those which examined the haunts of sea-fowl, of the coast of Norway, studded with islands from its southernmost point, the Lindeness. Nor could I pass unnoticed the bleak shores of Lapland, Siberia, Spitsbergen, Nova Zembla, Iceland, Greenland, and the vast sweep of the Arctic zone. Firm fields of ice, the accumulation of centuries of winters, they surrounded the pole with the rigors of extreme cold. Of these death-white realms I formed an idea of my own, shadowy, like all the half-understood notions that float dim through children's brains, but strangely impressive. The words in these pages connected themselves with the pictures that followed. They gave significance to the rock standing up alone in a sea of billow and spray, to the broken boat stranded on a desolate coast, to the cold and ghostly moon glancing through bars of cloud at a wreck just sinking. I cannot tell what feeling haunted the solitary churchyard. There stood its inscribed headstone, its gate, its 2 trees, its low horizon, surrounded by a broken wall, and a newly risen crescent, indicating the hour of evening. The 2 ships motionless on a sluggish sea I believed to be marine phantoms. The devil pinning down the thief's pack behind him I passed over quickly. It was an object of terror. So was the black horned thing seated alone on a rock, watching a distant crowd surrounding a gallows. Each picture told a story, mysterious, yet profoundly interesting. They were as interesting as the tales Bessie sometimes told on winter evenings, when she happened to be in a good mood. She, bringing her ironing table to the nursery hearth, allowed us to sit about it. While she pressed Mrs. Reed's lace frills and crimped her nightcap borders, she fed our eager attention with stories of love and adventure taken from old fairy tales and other ballads, or, as I later discovered, from the pages of Pamela and Henry, Earl of Morland. With Bewick on my knee, I was then happy at least in my way. I feared nothing but interruption, and that came too soon. The breakfast-room door opened. "Bo! Madam Mope!" cried the voice of John Reed. Then he paused. He found the room apparently empty. "Where the dickens is she?" he continued. "Lizzie! Georgie!" he called to his sisters. "Jane is not here. Tell Mamma she has run out into the rain. Bad animal." It is well I drew the curtain, thought I. I wished desperately he might not discover my hiding place. Nor would John Reed have found it out himself. He was not quick either of vision or thought. Unfortunately, Eliza put her head in at the door, and said at once, "She is in the window seat, to be sure, Jack." I came out immediately, for I trembled at the idea of being dragged forth by Jack. "What do you want?" I asked, with awkward reluctance. "Say, what do you want, Master Reed?" was the answer. "I want you to come here." Seating himself in an armchair, he indicated that I was to approach and stand before him. John Reed was a schoolboy of 14 years old, 4 years older than I, for I was but 10. Large and stout for his age, he had dull, unhealthy skin, thick features in a wide face, and heavy limbs. He gorged himself at meals, which made him queasy, and gave him dim, bleary eyes and flabby cheeks. He ought to have been at school, but his mamma had taken him home for a month or two, on account of his delicate health. Mr. Miles, the schoolmaster, maintained that he would do very well if he had fewer cakes sent to him from home. His mother's heart turned from this harsh opinion, and preferred the more refined idea that John's paleness was owing to overwork, and perhaps to pining for home. John had not much affection for his mother and sisters, and a hatred for me. He bullied and punished me, not 2 or 3 times in the week, nor once or twice in the day, but constantly. Every nerve I had feared him, and every morsel of flesh in my bones shrank when he came near. There were moments when I was bewildered by the terror he inspired. I had no appeal whatever against either his threats or his abuse. The servants did not like to offend their young master by taking my side against him, and Mrs. Reed was blind and deaf on the subject. She never saw him strike or heard him abuse me, though he did both now and then in her very presence. More frequently, however, it was behind her back. Habitually obedient to John, I came up to his chair. He spent some 3 minutes in sticking out his tongue at me as far as he could. I knew he would soon strike, and while dreading the blow, I considered the disgusting appearance of him who was about to deal it. I wonder if he read that notion in my face, for all at once, without speaking, he struck suddenly and strongly. I tottered, and on regaining my balance moved back a step or 2 from his chair. "That is for your impudence in answering Mamma before," said he, "and for your sneaking way of getting behind curtains, and for the look you had in your eyes 2 minutes ago, you rat." Accustomed to John Reed's abuse, I never had an idea of replying to it. My care was how to endure the blow which would certainly follow the insult. "What were you doing behind the curtain?" he asked. "I was reading." "Show the book." I returned to the window and fetched it. "You have no business to take our books. You are a dependent, Mamma says. You have no money. Your father left you none. You ought to beg, and not to live here with gentlemen's children like us, and eat the same meals we do, and wear clothes at our mamma's expense. Now, I'll teach you to look through my bookshelves, for they are mine. All the house belongs to me, or will in a few years. Go and stand by the door, away from the mirror and the windows." I did so, not at first aware of his intention. When I saw him lift the book and stand to hurl it, I instinctively leaped aside with a cry of alarm. Not soon enough, however. The volume was flung, it hit me, and I fell, striking my head against the door and cutting it. The cut bled, the pain was sharp. Terror had passed. Other feelings followed. "Wicked and cruel boy," I said. "You are like a murderer. You are like a slave driver. You are like the Roman emperors." I had read Goldsmith's History of Rome, and had formed my opinion of Nero and Caligula. I had drawn these parallels in silence, which I never planned to declare aloud. "What? What?" he cried. "Did she say that to me? Did you hear her, Eliza and Georgiana? Won't I tell Mamma? But first—" He ran headlong at me. I felt him grasp my hair and my shoulder, but he had closed with a desperate thing. I really saw in him a tyrant, a murderer. I felt a drop or two of blood from my head trickle down my neck, and was aware of sharp suffering. These sensations for a time overshadowed fear, and I met him frantically. I don't recall what I did with my hands, but he called me "Rat! Rat!" and bellowed out loud. Help was near him. Eliza and Georgiana had run for Mrs. Reed, who had gone upstairs. She now came upon the scene, followed by Bessie and her maid Abbott. We were separated. I heard the words, "Dear, dear, what a fury to fly at Master John! Did ever anybody see such a picture of passion?" Then Mrs. Reed added, "Take her away to the Red Room, and lock her in there." 4 hands were immediately laid upon me, and I was carried upstairs. That's the end of Chapter 1. If you enjoyed this book, check out the link in the description box below. Thank you.